It would only take a few House Republicans, three, to join with House Democrats in order to stop this madness. And so many of them in private will tell you that what Donald Trump is doing is crazy, it's destructive, it hurts, and they just don't have the spine to stand up and say in public and act on it like they do in private.
From Pennsylvania State's 2nd Congressional District, and he's also the ranking member of the House Budget Committee, sits on the Trade Subcommittee, so I guess an expert in this field. Congressman Boyle, welcome to you.
Well, great to be with you.
Now, tell me then your feelings right now, if I can start with that. As a Democrat and a congressman who's a specialist in trade, I'm guessing you will feel angry at what's going on. Do you also feel hopeless? Do you feel helpless, entirely helpless at what's happening?
Well, it is an entirely self-inflicted wound by the United States, thanks to what Donald Trump and Peter Navarro and those sycophants who work in the White House are doing Donald Trump's bidding. It makes absolutely no sense. It won't make America great again. Frankly, it's a lose-lose for the United States and for the world. So it's an enormously frustrating situation. Do I feel helpless? No, because, I mean, I've been elected by 750,000 people to represent them. I spoke to a crowd of about 15,000 people right in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia on Saturday. So I think people all across the United States are getting activated, something like I haven't seen in a very long time. And I do think that that can have an impact. But the reality is, and this is probably the most frustrating part, it would only take a few House Republicans, because the margins right now are the closest they've ever been in the House of Representatives in 100 years. It would only take a few House Republicans, three, to join with House Democrats in order to stop this madness. And so many of them in private will tell you that what Donald Trump is doing is crazy, it's destructive, it hurts, and they just don't have the spine to stand up and say in public and act on it like they do in private. So that adds to my frustration.
Oh, you give the impression there that there's a huge number of Republican Party congressmen who are willing to say to you, an opponent in the House, that they're dead opposed to the president's policy. Is that really the case? I mean, how do you quantify that?
I would be careful. I didn't say a huge number. I would be careful. I think
how many are we talking? 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, I mean, more than a handful. I mean, several dozen. And remember, again, it only takes three to be decisive in this, just because the margins right now.
Yeah, so forgive me, Congressman. Did you mean several dozen? Did you mean several dozen are saying privately they disagree with the president's policy? Or
I personally had conversations with a number of House Republicans. Other Democratic colleagues of mine have as well spoken to House Republicans who I haven't spoken to, who said the same thing, that they're worried, they know this is disastrous, but they tend to just, keep quiet, hope it will pass, because they are really, and justifiably, by the way, while I don't justify their lack of courage, they are reasonable in the sense that at this point still, speaking out as a House Republican against Trump is the quickest way to lose your primary if you are a Republican. That's the challenge. That even if Donald Trump drops to the low to mid 40s in approval rating, in a Republican primary, his approval rating would still be north of 80%.
Yeah, but I guess you don't need me to remind you of the fact that some of those grand old party congressmen that you're talking about now, they won their contest. They did well in Rust Belt states. You're from Pennsylvania. And in those states, there's a good deal of resentment. You know better than me. Resentment at seeing so many jobs exported to poorer countries with lower wages. When you look back and when you look forward to the next election, maybe the midterms, do you feel you got that wrong? Should you have been more convincing than you were at reaching those voters?
Yeah, so first, I mean, I've said before on different shows and have written this, that there are a lot of places in western and northeastern Pennsylvania that actually are a lot like the north of England. Places that were industrialized, were doing well, were factory towns. The kind of places in the north of England that voted for Brexit are the same sort of places in Pennsylvania that used to vote Democratic and then voted for Donald Trump 2, if not 3 times. I believe as a party, we have to do a much better job of trying to reach out to them. And it's insufficient just to say to a a man in his mid-50s who's been laid off. Well, we have this college program for you. Yeah, you can go back to college and some sort of implausible thing like that. The other challenge that we as Democrats face, and bear in mind, I think 2024 was primarily about inflation and the cost of living. But the deeper, more systemic issue that we faced over the last decade with our decline in vote share among non-college educated voters is the fact that our party too often has become culturally disconnected from mainstream Americans.
On what sort of issues are you out of touch with mainstream ordinary Americans?
Well, I think it's more perception than reality because, I mean, I know my Democratic colleagues. I know that genuinely we are fighting and are advocating policies that we believe, and I believe, are best for working class and lower income Americans and middle class Americans. But we don't come off that way. So I do think it's a perception issue. But the reality is too many Democrats get tagged with this elitist stigma. I believe in your country it's called champagne socialist. In this country, the term is limousine liberal. And there's more than a little truth to that. I mean, there is a very high income, socially liberal crowd within the Democratic Party that pushes these niche issues that are completely disconnected from the kind of working class neighborhood, the kind of working class neighborhood where I grew up.
I mean,
so that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about.
I just wonder what you do about that. This is probably the subject of a longer conversation, but I just wonder what you do about that in your party. Do you need more candidates with dirt under their fingernails, to put it simply?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that, and I know we're a bit off the topic of trade here, but just to kind of wrap up on this, I come authentically from a working class background. I grew up in a row home Philadelphia neighborhood. My dad was an immigrant from Ireland. I'm able to speak authentically about who I am, my background, and why I'm in politics and the kind of people I'm fighting for. I do think that if we ran candidates who were more of a grounded background, rather than always looking for the person who's a multimillionaire who can self-fund, that's a big part of the problem, I think, on the Democratic side.
Okay, I mean, you're right, we did go a bit off topic there, but I was interested by what you were saying. I want to go back on the question of tariffs now. Is it possible, listening to the president, I know reading the president's motives is not always easy, but is it possible that President Trump could land trade and tariff deals in the course of the next days and weeks, and then seek an off-ramp from this policy before the tariffs cause serious damage? That would leave him possibly in not a bad place with the American public and leave your party politically in a less favorable place. Is that fair?
The best way to predict future behavior is look at past behavior. So let's look at Trump the first term. He bashed NAFTA, called it the worst trade deal ever. Of course, with Trump, it's always the superlatives. Everything is either the best or the worst. NAFTA was the worst deal ever, the dumbest deal ever. He gets into office. He, along with congressional Democrats, actually, and I was one of them, worked with Canada and Mexico to renegotiate NAFTA. We came up with something called the USMCA. It wasn't perfect, but frankly, it was an improved version of it. It had tighter labor standards. By the way, Democrats' insistence, not congressional Republicans. And it ended up passing the House of Representatives in 2019 with over 400 votes. More than 80% of House Republicans and more than 80% of House Democrats voted for it. And then he was able to declare it the greatest deal ever. He, of course, claimed 100% credit. And then the issue went away. I hope and I think there's a real chance that will prove to be foreshadowing, that he'll end up striking deals, which, by the way, might actually not really change the status quo. But of course, with Trump, who is the ultimate marketer / con man, he will declare that this was somehow a 180-degree difference from how things were before. His ecosystem on the right, which is powerful, of MAGA media, will push out those lies that somehow this was a dramatic turn and an amazing accomplishment by the strong man, Donald Trump. Frankly, as absurd as that is, that would probably be actually a pretty best case scenario for all of us to avoid the sort of upheaval, further upheaval from what we've seen over the last week.
Right, so just lastly on the politics of this, then, listening to you there, as your previous answers, it sounds as if, given the difficulty that the Democratic Party faces in changing the perceptions of the party and the culture of the party, your best hope, your political hope, is vested in this administration basically handing the next election to you on a plate by making the mistakes that are going to tip the balance next time round. That's, in a sense, that's what you're hoping for.
No, I mean, I wouldn't put it like that. Look, we have, when you say the next elections, and this is where parliamentary
I guess I'm
democracy
thinking
differs from
midterms, I
ours.
suppose, yeah.
Yeah, there's a feature, as I'm sure you're aware, in midterm elections, where it's almost always the case that the party out of power does well. I mean, I fully expect, and I think most neutral experts would agree, that Democrats are the favorite to win the majority in the House of Representatives next November. We have a bigger challenge in the Senate due to the map. So I fully expected that history will continue and that we will do well regardless. The reality is Donald Trump and all the chaos that he sowed over the last 2.5 months, it's bad for the country. But yes, of course, if you're the party in opposition, it is good for the opposition party. It has certainly motivated our voters. Like I said, I spoke before 15,000 people this past weekend. I mean, that's a crowd that frankly we couldn't get 6 months ago, that has now been activated in opposition to what Donald Trump is doing. So I'll continue to advocate for policies that I think are right. But the worse this goes, it is true that, as it's always the case, it is best for the opposition party when the party in power is not doing well.
All right. It's really interesting to get your thoughts, Congressman. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
All right. Thank you.
That is Brendan Boyle from the Pennsylvania 2nd Congressional District.